What's up everyone, this is Ryan here and you are watching episode 31 of my Android developer livestream Q&A. So for this episode I basically plan to just mostly do Q&A. I don't really have a lesson planned for the start or anything like that. Before I get to that though, I would just like to thank the following patrons. So this Q&A show as of right now is supported by donations, and I would just like to thank Sushil Chanda, Seth Keegan, Trevor Halvorson, Bassam Halal, Nanotech, Shadow, Mr. Bidwell, Shoku Mostofi, Graham Hertzeg, Tina Fredericks, and Alad Stabby. So to those people, thank you very much for your kind support and donations. And for everyone else, it's our commercial for the day. If you'd like to contribute to what I do, then consider having a look at my Patreon page. And as you'll see, there's a couple different awards going on. So for basically any level of patron, starting at $1, you're pretty much going to get priority access for live stream Q&A. And of course, I'll read it out. And so that's kind of the starter package there. And then if your donation is $10 or higher, then you'll get access to my paid content. So for now, that really just includes my Android Developer Ebook, which is priced at $11, so you can potentially save a whole $1 there. And as I add more sort of content to my repertoire, so I'll probably end up doing another version of the ebook for Kotlin and stuff like that, then you should get access to most content, most paid content. If you would like to basically have the opportunity to have me talk at you or ask me questions for an hour or something like that, then I do also have a tutor/mentor service. And that's basically that. And then the last one, and then we'll get to some Q&A, is if you would like to actually sponsor one of the wise-ass Q&As. Oops, I just realized my friggin' face is blocking that. But if you'd like to become an official wise-ass sponsor and actually sponsor a show and even have me do an introductory kind of brief commercial for you if you have a product or social media account or something like that, then consider checking out this reward here. I did sales for a number of years, so it's not outside of my experience to get up here and sell stuff for you. I'm trying really hard not to swear right now, because yeah. Anyways, let's get started. So that's the commercial for today, and yeah, not too much going on. I do have one big announcement, and that announcement is that I am planning to do an interview with my friend Darrell, who is a very talented developer. And I'm super excited to do this interview because we've already had sort of Hangouts chats before and talked for hours about software architecture and really interesting stuff. So I'm really excited to get one of these conversations on camera. And Darrell is someone who does clean architecture basically better than anyone else I've ever seen. And I'm not really exaggerating that. So I'm super excited to go through his repositories. Basically what I plan to do is I'm going to be, of course, being the facilitator and the host. There will probably still be a bit of back and forth going, but for the most part I want to focus on how Darrell has achieved just like the most insane level of separation of concerns. He basically does a lot of things. How I could explain it is for like a year now I've had this idea in my head of what I would like to build as far as like architecture is concerned. And I'll pull up an image really quickly to sort of talk about what I'm referring to that there. Let's see here. So it's the age-old Ryan's architecture diagram, but Darrell hasn't necessarily done exactly this, but he's done this type of thing, which is what I would call a real clean architecture. And the main thing with clean architecture that you need to pay attention to is, of course, you're going to have like this presentation layer, so you've got fragment and presenter, but you're also going to have use cases, and you're going to have this data/model layer down here. And one of the things you can do, and this is something Darrell has done, is you can actually turn these into their own sort of modules within your project. Anyways, I don't want to talk about this too much, and Darrell does his own thing. He doesn't necessarily do exactly what I do here, but the point of that little anecdote is what was really amazing when he decided to put some of his code open source. It was like, holy crap, like you basically did what I have wanted to build, except better. So really excited for that, and watch out on social media for more announcements on that. But we're basically in the final stages of planning on it, so I thought I'd give a quick kind of announcement there. Anyways, so what's up, everyone? Looks like someone wants a paging library tutorial with component architecture and room and retrofit. I don't think I'll be able to put together a tutorial with those specific things, but I will be looking into the paging library for sure. And I do have content on room and retrofit. Like, I've got a whole Android Rust tutorial to talk about retrofit, but definitely I will be looking into the paging library because that looks pretty handy. But yeah, so right off the bat, I have to ask everyone, we've got 16 viewers here, so someone's got to have a question. I can keep rambling about stuff, but at the end of the day, this is Q&A, so maybe I'll talk about what I was learning earlier today. So what I was learning about earlier was Kotlin coroutines. Now, I closed the project that I had open, but this is kind of a new concept which I'm learning about. Now, I'm not really going to give like a lesson on coroutines because I'm not there, but one of the main questions I had about Kotlin coroutines is like, okay, can I use it to basically replace my RxJava implementation? And is it good enough to do that? Does it give me the same sort of features and convenience that RxJava gives me? Because you might probably, there's a lot of beginners watching this and they're not really familiar with RxJava or coroutines, but suffice it to say, what we're looking for is you're in almost any app you design, not necessarily all of them, but most complicated applications, you're going to have code that executes synchronously, and you're going to have code that executes asynchronously. So when I say asynchronous, normally what the example I would use is I want you to think like a callback. So we're saying to a REST adapter, get me the data, and then the REST adapter calls back to our application. And so you can use RxJava for that stuff, and RxJava has been integrated with a number of libraries. So for example, Room has Rx integration, Retrofit, just a number, like there's a lot of support for RxJava. So it's going to be kind of an interesting thing to see whether coroutines can totally replace that, because on the surface of things, what I've learned so far, and these are my notes, entire notes on it, but essentially what coroutines are is it's one of the main goals is to get rid of callbacks, asynchronous, that sort of callback style of writing asynchronous code, and then to also have sort of cheaper threads. Like essentially what I've gathered so far is that coroutines are a way to set up threads which can be suspended, and that's basically different from creating a new thread and stuff like that. So I don't know enough about it to give you a long-winded explanation, but there does seem to be really good potential for coroutines. I'm just not sure yet. I'm not ready to tear RxJava out completely because I've finally gotten to the point where I actually see how useful it is. So yeah, we'll see there. Anyways, let's have a look at the questions. So questions and comments. Ravi asked a tutorial on REST API. Holy crap, man, you need to go check out my channel because I have a whole beginner Android REST tutorial. Sorry for hitting the, I've had a lot of coffee today. Yeah, I have that tutorial you're asking for, so go check out my channel. It's called like Android REST tutorial, and it'll show you how to set up a whole basic retrofit implementation and a couple other things. All right, so let's pull up the old notepad here. I totally forgot to do that. All right. Configuring Makoto with Kotlin. I can certainly do that. And to Miroslav, who says, hi Ryan, and really support for doing this. Hey, no worries, man. I do this to help beginners and other sort of bedroom developers like me sort of sort this stuff out, so no problem. All right, so let's get started here. So this question is from Tina. And damn it, where's the thing? And Tina asks, can you go over configuring Makoto with Kotlin? And I see I did reduce the font size here. Let me bring that up a little bit. And I can certainly do that. Okay, hopefully I have the right project open. So one of the first things I did when I basically got started learning Kotlin, I've been working with it for about 3 weeks now. One of the first things I wanted to figure out is, okay, how can I basically do all the stuff I would normally do in a Java app? And for me, that means I want to know how I can write unit tests. So let's go hop over. Now, I talk about unit testing a lot. If there's anyone who's sort of not certain about what unit testing is or the approaches, you can, if you like, ask a follow-up question. For now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try not to tangent. I'm just going to answer. Normally, I would explain what unit testing is, but let's just try and I'll try not to tangent too much this time. But if you're curious, ask me later and I can explain what a unit test is. So what I'm going to do is open up a couple things here. All right, so there was a couple things I had to do to actually set up unit tests. So first and foremost, let's see here, or to set up Makoto. What do I want to do here? Let's try presentation mode. Oh, it doesn't look like it's loading properly. There we go. All right, so this is a unit test class. So I'm basically, in any project you'll see, pretty much, unless it's just like a little random demo project, you're gonna see that I test presenters. And my general recommendation for anyone wondering what should you unit test, my suggestion is you should test the things that have a lot of logic, because at the end of the day, that's really what you're testing. Logic, which, you know, drives behavior and state. And so in order to set up unit tests, I wanted to figure out, okay, how do we do this differently in Kotlin? So I ended up, I'm just going to mention that the main resource I used to figure this out was actually by this blog here by Antonio Leva. And I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, but there's basically one of the ways you can be able to run your Makoto API in Kotlin is you need to create this Makoto extensions file. And I think there's a couple other things you need to do. That doesn't look right. Extensions. And so let me go ahead and pull that out. But my main suggestion, so go ahead and check out this link here. I can actually post that in the comments section for anyone curious. There we go. So what I had to do is, first off, I had to add this file. And where is that? So that's going to be test. So within the test source set here, on the side here. So just for anyone curious, if you've ever wondered why when you create a new project, you have this Android test package, you've got main and you've got test. So Android test is going to be for like espresso kind of UI tests. And then test is going to be where you would typically put unit tests. That wasn't very, they didn't really explain that very much in the docs as far as I recall, so I just wanted to mention that. And what you have to do is you have to basically just create this file here called org.blah blah blah mockmaker. And I don't think it has much code. Yeah, it's like just, it is one line. I'm just gonna hit enter like 4 times, but this is literally all that's in that file. And it's just a little bit off the screen. So I created that file, and I have to think, maybe I had some, I'll open up build Gradle and see if I had to add some things here. Did I need support? So Makoto. Again, I don't know which exactly of these are necessary, but these are my current classes for these are my current dependencies for being able to execute the tests. So as far as I know, when you get that stuff set up and then you add this mock maker class over here, I'm going to navigate back to the test class that was calculator presenter. Oh, no, calculator presenter test. There we go. So once you've added that file and you've created the appropriate dependencies, you can basically use Mockito like you did in Java. The syntax is a little weird, and I really have to give a caveat. I suspect this will change over time. So if you're watching this video a couple months from now or something like that, I would assume they're going to do something. Sorry, it sounds like my microphone's kind of going crazy. I would assume basically that that this syntax may change. But what we essentially do is, so we get all that stuff set up, and then we call our mocks and everything like usual. And then I think this is to denote that we're calling a Java method or something. I don't really know exactly what the those apostrophe things there are, but longer story short, once you get that stuff set up, you can basically run your tests like you normally would with a fairly stereotypical Java unit test. And then we've got all the same stuff, mockito.verify. So essentially what we're doing is we're partly verifying state and behavior. So hopefully that kind of answers your question. That was what I had to do as far. Hopefully I'm not missing a step, but definitely check out that blog if I missed something, and it'll probably be there. All right, let's. Oh, my stream output is a little low. I'm not sure why, but my computer is like really churning today, which I'm not super happy about. But whatever. All right. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to run a quick commercial break. If you've enjoyed the show so far, please do me a favor, hit the like button down below. So I might be experiencing slight technical difficulties here. Because, oh, okay, it looks like my stream health is back to normal. It looks like my computer is having a really hard time running things right now. But, so if the stream starts to lag or something like that, or weird things happen, please do let me know. Otherwise I won't really notice. But anyways, let's carry on here. So what do we got? So that was configuring Mockito with Kotlin. Talk about repository. All right, so this one's going to be this is a fairly high-level, complicated question. So I'll see what I can do. All right, so Prativ asks, so talk about the repository part of the diagram. I'll show you the diagram in a second. And how do we load room first and then sync from a network? And Prativ also added a second comment, which was that he wants to be able to do that and also mock network requests in Android tests. So there's kind of two questions nested in here, which I'll try to get to. So number one, let's look at this diagram that Prativ mentioned. I'll pull it up in a second here. Sorry, when I'm concentrating, my eyebrows do this, and then people think I'm angry, but that's just kind of a natural reaction I have. I think it is maybe Eastern European heritage in my blood. Like thousands of years of oppression just carved into my face. Gives serious expression. Anyways, that's my vaguely Eastern European accent for everyone. Apologies if you're offended easily. But it's not problem. Potato is in my blood. I'm probably going to hear shit for that one. Okay, pictures. Here we go. Potato is life. So let's look at this diagram. So Prativ is asking, let me pull up the question again. So let's talk about the repository. This is a really interesting topic. I'm going to try and zoom in, but Windows 10's photo viewer is questionable at best. So the first things, so this is what Prativ was talking about. And this is essentially what's called the repository pattern. Now there's another word, I've seen this called something else. It's also a facade pattern, if you're familiar. I don't think I have my design patterns explained book. Just one moment, it's right over here. All right, and this is important to kind of talk about. Just give me one moment. There we go with the angry expression again. Here we go. The facade pattern, if you want to pronounce it incorrectly, but it's actually facade because it's originally a French word. But so essentially what the facade or repository pattern is you see these boxes, there's an interface in the middle of all these boxes with lines. So what does that interface, that one, do? So it turns out, let's say you've got a part of your app that's like something that should be plugged into, like a main part of your app, and then this main part of your app needs to use a different part. So we're talking maybe it needs to use a database, it needs to use a network adapter, a REST adapter. So if it turns out that both the REST adapter and the database essentially return the same data, then you can actually apply what's sometimes called the facade pattern, or you can apply the repository pattern. So what is it? If I go back to my is the sound really loud? Because OBS Studio is telling me that I'm yelling into the microphone. I'll try and adjust that a little. If we go back to this diagram, this is essentially a smaller, this is a version of what I showed you in that book. So the purpose of the repository is essentially to hide the implementation details of what's behind the facade or the repository. And why would we do that? We do that because our use case, use cases, for example, because you could potentially have a use case talking, but let's say our presenter, our sort of presentation layer shouldn't know anything about the data layer. It should be able to just be like, get me the data, and then the data layer figures out the remote and local stuff and syncs them together and all that stuff. So that's at the core of what Prativ is asking is, how do we actually implement this repository pattern? And so when we see remote and local, what I'm talking about here is local could be a database. Oops. Local could be a database, so we're thinking room, we're thinking realm, we're thinking SQLite type stuff. And remote could be volley, retrofit, some remote cloud kind of service. I don't like the word cloud because it really just means someone else's computer, but anyways, yeah. So this is kind of what we want to do, and this is a pretty common pattern because let's say you have let's say you have a phone, an app, let's say you have an app which loads data from the internet or a remote source. In order to improve the user experience, you might want to also add a local database or some way of caching data so that when the user opens their app and you have no internet connection, you're still giving them some data. So how do we actually go about, so let me just look at the question one more time. How do we load data? So Prativ has asked specifically, like, how do we load data from room first and then sync from a network? So you're asking a very specific implementation question, and I'll kind of show you how to go about doing it, but that's a super specific thing. So let me see if I can find some code. I'll show you kind of how I would approach it, but I haven't necessarily come up with exactly the best way to do this. I'll just show you how far I've gotten so far, if I can find the thing. This is actually, the thing is, this is one of the things that I want to know if I can do this easily in Kotlin coroutines. So I'm pulling up, I've got a repository open, so Rx event architecture. And basically what this repository's purpose was just for me to teach myself this sort of an event-based Rx architecture. And if I go to, I'm going to open presenter, and then I think, do I have a repository? Service A, no. Presenter interactor. All right, so what I want you to think of, so I've opened this thing called a use case, and what I want you to think of is, so that is truly this thing here. So our presenter is going to talk to a use case, and then our use case is going to talk to a repository. We don't need to think about the system service thing right now. Just to keep the visual metaphor going. And so in this little demo project, it's not meant to be fleshed out. It's just a concept essentially. But so my presenter talks to a use case. So the use case might be get data. I don't think you mentioned a specific data type, Prativ, but so let's say you're building a note app, you might have a use case called get note. So we give the presenter the use case, and then when we want to, we execute this use case. Blah, blah, blah. We won't talk about the Rx stuff. In the use case, we have two different services. So I've actually not really, I'm kind of using this like a repository and a use case in a sense. But so what we have is we have two data services. And what I want you to think of is this could be remote, this could be a REST service, and this could be a database. It doesn't actually matter. It's just for the purposes of demonstration. How you would go about doing this is you wouldn't want, oops, what happened there? There we go. So assuming you're using something like Model View Presenter, you don't want a situation where you have your presenter depending on a remote and a local data source. That doesn't make sense if they return the same data. Instead, you hide that behind either use case or repository or something of that nature. They all have similar goals of hiding data. And so you hide that, and then you have this sort of class between, which talks to the two things. So we say, let's get the data from some data service, and let's get the data from some system service. Now, your question was, how do we, for example, load data from room first, and then say like a remote data source? And I don't have that exact code for you, but the kind of thing you would do is you might use like RxJava's, here's the thing, how I would solve this is with usage of RxJava operators and stuff like that. And I just don't have that code handy right now. So I can't like give you I can't just give you the whole implementation here. But for example, RxJava's zip operator allows you to basically combine streams. There's other operators like do first and things like that. And this is how I would go about solving that problem. So I know that's a vague kind of answer, but that's really all I can give you for now. So that's that. Now you had a second question. So you would want to set up a repository. You're absolutely right, Prativ. You're heading in the right direction. So try and set up some kind of a repository to hide that stuff from the front end of your application. And then you're going to need to use probably some API, probably RxJava, maybe live data. I'm not super sure, but something like that. Now, the second part of your question is, Prativ also wants to be able to mock network requests in tests. And boy, do I have a API for you to check out. So I'm going to open up Android REST tutorial, link in the description box. And where is it? So I've got this class in here called GitHub REST Adapter Test. And it uses an API called mock web server. So if you're testing a REST API, you're going to want to know what this is, mock web server. And so what mock web server does is when you build your API, your retrofit stuff, you give it the URL path to the server instead of, like, say, for example, whatever, in this case, I would normally pass in the URL to GitHub's server, but in this case, we're going to use the mock web server. So we kind of build it. Now, you might need to be applying dependency injection. I've applied dependency injection here, so I can build that stuff and give it to my REST adapter instead of having the REST adapter build its stuff, which is harder to test. Hint, hint. People always ask me, should I bother with dependency injection? If you write tests, then yeah. And then what you can do, I'm not sure why this is showing up red, but oh, I probably changed something and forgot to update my tests because I'm a terrible programmer. But so what you can do with mock web server is you can enqueue a response. And so what I've done is I've enqueued a new response. I've given it a response code just like you would get from a normal server. And then I've added to the body some sampled JSON data, which is in this class here. And so what I've done here is I just like copied and pasted this JSON data from GitHub's URL, GitHub's REST endpoint. And so I basically make like fake data and I test what happens when I pass this thing into the adapter test. So for example, and the last thing I'll talk about is we have tests here. So we've got on get repository successful. We've got, yeah, just a couple different things. And then we're basically just testing what happens when something's invalid, blah, blah, blah. So, so that's how I would go about doing this. And Prativ, I would say that you're really on the right track here. Like, should you test everything and have 100% code coverage and always follow test-driven development 100%? I don't know if that's necessarily pragmatic. What I would say is you do want to test the important stuff. I would argue you want to be testing like your retrofit implementation. Because why not? Test it before you publish it, you know? Be a good programmer, basically. You want to be testing your presenters because they contain logic. Yeah, that's basically it. Hopefully that was useful. So I'm just going to run another quick commercial break, and then we'll get back to more Q&A. All right. Got some interesting questions. All right. So this is just a quick question by someone with a possibly questionable name. I'm kind of just making fun of you, but so Rare asks, which language do I like using the most? What I would say, so I've used Java for over 4 years now. and I've been using Kotlin for under a month. I've learned a little bit about it, but as far as actually coding in Kotlin regularly, that's only been for a couple weeks. What I would say is, at this point, I can only give you likelihoods. I can't actually say which I totally prefer, but I like Kotlin a lot. Excuse me. I like Kotlin a lot, and it looks like they're heading in the right direction. And if, for example, coroutines pans out to be something really useful, which I'm not 100% sure yet, then I'll start to like it even more. It's a little bit too early for me to say, I'm going to stick with Java, I'm going to stick with Kotlin, because I probably won't ever say that. Java will always be the first programming language that I really designed actual architectures with, and so that will always kind of influence my thinking. But if Kotlin basically does what I think they're trying to do, which is let's make a modern version of Java that you can write faster and has less annoying stuff, then Kotlin probably will become what I prefer to write code in. And it's already kind of getting there. Anyways, what else have we got here? So, I can try and explain Dagger. Do I have an app which... okay, I'll try and help you with this, and we'll see how far I get. Okay, so this is going to be an interesting one for me to impact. So Andev asks, could you explain how Dagger 2 works? Now, and he or she, I don't actually know, but Andev also, statistically speaking, probably he, but I do have a few ladies watching, which, like, good on you. Let's break the stereotypes. So, where is it? I totally lost the question because YouTube comments exploded. Sorry about that. What the hell, YouTube comments? Okay, so let's talk about this. The question was, could you explain how Dagger 2 works using a simple example? So here's the thing, Andev, this is the biggest problem with Dagger 2, is that I'm happy to explain what dependency injection is. Like, I'm happy to explain that. That's a basic concept. And it's not that I'm reluctant to explain what Dagger 2 is. It's just the difference between showing... You mentioned specifically, can I show you a simple version of it? And that's kind of the problem, is that if you're using Dagger 2... it's almost not that useful if you don't use kind of a complicated implementation. So I'm kind of struggling to how to explain this, but what I'll do is let me take you through and explain just kind of verbally. I won't go into real under the hood stuff because there's too much to explain. I don't want to talk about Dagger for 30 minutes, and I easily could talk about it for an hour, but I'll talk a little bit about how Dagger works, which is your main question, and I will show you an implementation. Just understand that in order to really see the benefits of Dagger 2 and dependency injection, it might need to be a little complicated. Dagger is one of these things. Dependency injection itself is simple, very simple. It's something that even a child could understand. Dagger 2 implementations are pretty complicated. So let's get started. I'm going to open up Android REST tutorial, or I could do I have it in Kotlin calculator? I forget now. If I do, I should actually just ask, do you prefer Kotlin or Java? Yeah, I think I did actually write it out. Well, whatever. I'll just stick with, I'll assume you want a Java implementation, but I do have some code in Kotlin anyways. So what I'm going to do, so the code I'm going to be looking at is Android REST tutorial, which just happens to use Dagger 2. Link in the description somewhere if you want to check out the actual code. And I would suggest you look at code, because otherwise this stuff's going to be very confusing. So let's go to presentation mode. And so what I'm going to do, actually I don't think I'll do presentation mode because I'll have a lot of tabs open. So first and foremost, really quickly, what is dependency injection? And this is just a really key thing if anyone's wondering or watching and they don't actually know, like, what is dependency injection? Is Dagger 2 dependency injection? Let me just clarify a couple things really quickly. So, number one, dependency injection is a concept. Dagger 2 / toothpick / coin / coding. I'm just listing a couple libraries for people if you're curious. Oops. Are tools, or I would call them frameworks, but just to make it easier, are tools which help you write your DI implementation. They help you do dependency injection. So dependency injection, just bump that up a little bit. Dependency injection just is literally, this is what dependency injection is. Okay, class, some class, so we're going to do whatever, public, some class. Just give me a moment to write out an example. I should probably write this in Android Studio because it would be quicker, but whatever. Object some dependency. All right, so that's all. I won't even write the rest of the code. This is just pseudo code, but so this would be, yeah, object some dependency. Okay. And this will be not dependency injection. And we say new. Oops, sorry, I'm used to writing Kotlin, half Java, so that's going to be some in Java, some dependency equals new object, whatever. It's just a pseudocode example. So this is what dependency injection is for anyone trying to understand what is dependency injection. It really is just not a complicated thing. Here's what it is. Without dependency injection, my object builds its own dependencies. With dependency injection, something else gives the object dependencies. The easiest way to achieve that, and you've already used, I'm sure everyone listening to this has already applied dependency injection. Dependency injection is giving an object its dependency instead of having the object create its own dependency. So why is that useful? It allows us to pass in fake things when we want to test. So we could test in our, as I showed you before with the mock web server thing, blah, blah, blah. So that's dependency injection. So, so that's kind of the key point. And then how does Dagger 2 kind of work? And I really can't talk about this for too long, but let's have a look. So what you'll do essentially with Dagger 2, here's how I would do it. There's different ways to do it. So what I do is I'll have a dependency injection package in every application, and this corresponds to my architecture actually. Let me just show you one thing really quick. the diagram's getting lots of use today. So this is, what I'm about to show you is this thing here. I treat my DI framework and implementation as its own layer of my application, essentially. So naturally that means it's going to get its own package. So anyways, back to the code. So in my DI package, you're going to find a bunch of different things. Most of them will be called modules and components. Again, I can't give you a long sermon on Dagger 2, but what we're doing here is we're building a graph of dependencies, and at runtime, based on annotations, that DI implementation is going to build what we need when we need it. Now that's where things get really complicated. So on the surface of things, let's say I open up an activity, something that I actually inject into. Do I inject in the main activity? I don't think I do. Fragment? Sorry, it's been a while since I even looked at this code. Go away, enter file name. Oh my god, that's so annoying. Go away. Arrgh. Oh my fucking god. Sorry, pardon my language. I just really hate my IDE right now. Okay. Here we go. Okay, here we go. So anyways, as I was talking about, so when you've configured this giant mass of components and modules, what that will afford you is you'll be able to just slap an inject annotation on your classes. In this case, this is constructor injection. You can slap annotations on fields or members. So that's like member injection, but you want to try and do constructor injection. And so the cool thing about this is all of a sudden our presenter doesn't have to build anything, and it gets given everything when it needs it. So the last thing I'll talk about, I can't give you a full explanation here, it's just too much to cover, but the last thing I'll say is what makes Dagger 2 interesting is so you write these components and you write your modules and you do that stuff, and then what Dagger does behind the scenes is it builds a bunch of code for you. So the last thing I'll mention is that once you've configured this all correctly, look at the code. Honestly, like, it's not good for me to explain this to you. Just look at the code, look at a bunch of different people and how they apply Dagger 2, and you'll figure it out eventually. But we're talking, it took me like months to really nail this down. I'm not saying months straight, but over time it took me a while. Anyways, the last thing I'll talk about is when we go to the build folder in our project, I need to make sure I'm in the right thing here. There we go, this one. Build, and again, let's see if I can remember which one it was. Sorry, it's in one random folder and I don't... which one is it? That's irritating. Just give me a minute here, sorry. Which friggin' folder is it? I found it a little while ago. Actually, why don't we do it like this? Let's go Control N, and then we'll say Dagger application component, and that will probably tell me. Yeah, okay. And where is this located? That should... Okay, whatever. Longer story shorter, somewhere in the build folder, sometimes I very often forget exactly where. Somewhere in the build folder, you'll find all of the stuff that Dagger builds for you. And when you go through that, you start to understand what Dagger actually does. It builds a graph of dependencies based on all your modules and components, jargon, 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 and at runtime. So it builds this all at compile time. So the cool thing about this is that you're not using reflection, which means you're not like having something that runs separate from your app at runtime. Dagger builds the whole thing at compile time, and then you can use it. Anyways, I'm going to stop talking about that, but hopefully that kind of helps. I do plan to do a Dagger 2 tutorial eventually, but I've got a lot of stuff to do, so I don't know exactly when I'll get to that. But yeah, hopefully that kind of explains that. All right, let's see, what else have we got? I've got quite a few questions, so I'm just going to be a little bit selective here. Gertek has a question about running a Mockito test, and he gets AAP2 problems. Unfortunately, I haven't had that issue, so I can't help you. Apparently, my Russian accent is entertaining to people. That's good. I've never heard the so there Miroslav was wondering if sorry, I'm squinting a lot again. Miroslav is asking if the word store is analogous to repository in terms of like a repository pattern. I've never heard the word store used before, but at the end of the day, we all make this shit up as we go anyway, so maybe that is a valid another name for it. Like I learned about the repository pattern as the facade pattern, and then I saw it in some Android project, or actually I think it was actually in the Android docs, and I'm like, well, isn't that the facade pattern? We all use different names for the same concepts. It's annoying, but it happens. Apparently I look like Ed Sheeran. I'm pretty sure Ed Sheeran is a ginger, and I don't think I am, but anyways, I don't think that was exactly an insult. Let me just, I've got a ton of questions. Let me just give me 2 minutes here. To Andev asks, so I'm a total beginner with, asks if I'm a total beginner with Kotlin. I'm about 3 weeks into learning it. I've looked at Kotlin for a couple months. Like I've kind of been looking at it, but as far as actually coding in Kotlin, it's been about 3 weeks. I'm very lucky that I have amazing, awesome friends that have awesome Kotlin repositories, and I also look at Android blueprints. That was a good voice crack. And so the thing that I do is so when I'm learning a new language, I will try and look mostly at code, and I will try and write a lot of code. And I won't so much look at the Kotlin guides. So the bonus of that is that I get good at the skill of writing Kotlin. The problem is I need to then go back and read the documentation and be like, oh, okay, under the hood, this is why we do this. I don't have a very good memory for remembering like just super specific under the hood implementation things. If I haven't written it in code, I don't remember it very well. If I've written it in code, I understand the concept behind all the word bullshit. Sorry, pardon my language. I don't mean to swear too much, but I do. But that's kind of how my brain works, and how I approach learning programming is the first thing I do is I try and build the thing. So if I'm learning Dagger 2, let's build the thing, and then ask questions later. So that works well for me. I'll talk about use cases, and that'll probably be it. There's a couple of kind of questions here. So all right, so Tina asks, what are use cases, and what is a good sample project? And I think, what was the other thing? Are they a must? Are they a must? Okay, so this is going to be an interesting kind of ramble. So the first time I learned about use cases, which are also sometimes called interactors, and essentially what I'm really talking about is this layer here. So what I used to do is, when I started with Model View Presenter, I would basically have the presenter talking straight to a repository. I wouldn't have this use case layer here per se. So here's some notes on, so here's, it's a big topic, and this is definitely something I would normally want to have a scripted answer to. So I'll just give you what I can, and it might not be very insightful, but so when I think of a use case, I think two things, two purposes. What is it for? Number one, there's a degree to which you're abstracting your data or your model from your presenter. So that's one of the goals. In other words, I want my presenter talking to let me show you some code that'll help. If I go to Kotlin calculator, now I'm going to explain in a minute why this isn't actually, actually that's kind of my counter example, which I'll explain in a minute. Do I have? Let me just see if I can find some code here. Do you talk to use cases? No. So, sorry, I'm just really trying to think of how to explain this decently. Okay, here's what I'll do. Let me show you an example of where, let's look at an example where use case really makes sense, and then I'll show you an example where it almost is just implied, and that sounds really weird, but I'm talking about abstract concepts here, and it's hard for me to put them into words, but I will try. If you look at I showed this to people earlier. This is my RX event architecture kind of demo project. It is publicly available on my GitHub. And if I go to the app package, the main package, I should say, what we're going to see is we're going to see interactor, we're going to see model, presenter, and view. So interactor, this is where some confusion can happen. Interactor also kind of means domain or use cases. That it's three words for essentially the same thing: domain, use case, interactors. It refers to this layer. We've got the view and the presenter, and we've got the repository, a data source, and a data source. And I've got that represented in this package structure. So so first and foremost, use cases will help you achieve separation of concerns, because instead of a presenter talking to a repository, it talks to a use case. So what'll generally happen is you'll have several of these use cases. So if I pull up Pos Trainer really quickly, we're going to go to Alarm List Presenter. So this is basically an alarm manager app, and it's capable of getting lists of alarms. It's capable of creating alarms, deleting them, setting them, cancel them. And these are my use cases. And so what are these use cases? They are high-level things that my app needs to do, and I'm going to give them a specific name and like a single thing, and that's going to help me design the app. So that's the other part of it. It helps with separation of concerns. It helps you design the app because it's a high-level description of what your app does, whereas the model is a description of what your app's, what data you are modeling in reality. Use cases describe what does your application need to do. So for an alarm app, it needs to be able to set alarms, delete them, create them, blah, blah, blah. All this stuff you see here. So when the user hits a button or something gets triggered, we execute a use case. So in Pos Trainer, that looks like, so when the application starts, we call get reminders. So what that use case is going to do is it's going to get a list of alarms or reminders from the use case, which is going to come from the database. So hopefully that's kind of making sense. So key points, no reference to the model in my presenter. My presenter does not know how the model does what it does, or the data layer. I like to say data layer, but some people say model. So that's really useful. And then it helps me design the app because I can write out these use cases without actually I can defer decisions, but be like, okay, I know I need to be able to get a list of alarms. I know I need to be able to delete an alarm, that kind of stuff. Hopefully that's making sense. I'll move on from there. So the idea with use cases is that, so part of the benefit is you're getting separation of concerns. So in the event you have like a, where's the repository? Where are you? Wo bist du? Ich weiß es nicht. So what's going to happen is, so when we call a use case, it's going to have whatever services it needs. So maybe it'll have a local database, data source. Maybe it'll have a remote data source. Maybe it'll talk to a system service and then take some data from that system service, like a GPS location or coordinate, give that to a REST adapter. A REST adapter sends it off, and then you get some data. All of that happens behind the presenter. The presenter just calls one method. The presenter calls the use case and says, do the thing. The use case then, as Uncle Bob, not my uncle of course, but Robert Martin says, the interactor, I like how he describes it, it coordinates the dance. It coordinates the dance of the entities and the services. It coordinates them so that the presenter doesn't have to. So I've hopefully kind of explained what a use case is. I'm probably not doing a great job of it, but one of the other questions was, is it a must? I would be inclined to say no. So I just showed you an app which is fairly complicated, which is presenter. Well, it's not super complicated, but complicated enough. So I've showed you I've showed you a project which uses use cases. Now, in my Kotlin calculator app, sorry, my voice is getting a little hoarse. In my Kotlin calculator application, I decided not to use use cases. I actually built this app originally with use cases. You can even see I have the domain package here, and I probably even have base use case. Why am I why did I decide not to actually do that? And I'm actually kind of doing the opposite of what I said before, which is I'm going to be having a presenter which actually does, I'm not even sure if I've coded it. Yeah, I have coded it in here. It's actually going to talk directly to what is essentially my repository. So all of a sudden I'm kind of going against what I said before. Why? Do you always need a use case? I don't think so. Why don't I think I need a use case here? It's a calculator application. There's only one data source. There's no local, there's no remote, there's no system service, and I know that is not going to change. I know that for a fact. So in this particular case, it doesn't actually make sense to me for me to delegate calls to the data source. When I say data source, ultimately it's a calculator thing, but let's just think of it like a data source. Fundamentally, that's what it is. And since there's only one method I'm ever going to call, because I'm using RxJava and I can do that, there's only one method I'm going to call. I know the implementation is not going to change drastically over time. Then I don't need a use case. I don't think. So what I would be inclined to say is, do you need use cases? No. Do you need to apply separation of concerns some way, at least using a repository at the bare minimum? I would say yes. Are use cases really useful for more than just hiding data, or more than just separation of concerns? They can be. Use cases will generally be like one of the first things I actually think about when I design a new application. And there is I think one more part to this. What is a good sample project was the last part of this question. My biggest suggestion, I don't think he would mind if I linked it here, but my friend, so for like the ultimate, this is what I'm going to be interviewing my friend Darrell about actually. Let me pull up his repository and give him a shout out here, because this is absolutely amazing code. So this you can check this out. This is Darrell Bitsy, or Bitsy Daryl, and this is one of his repositories. And if you look in here, so if you want to see like a crazy high-level implementation of this whole thing, except more, check out his app. You're going to see that there's 3 modules. There's app, data, and domain. So he's actually separated these things out into modules. Domain is this thing here. Use cases or domain, and app is going to be presentation kind of view, and then data is going to be model or data. I think he just calls that one data. So that is like my favorite resource. You can peruse a couple of my projects. I do, sorry, my shoulder's really sore. I do have a couple projects which will show you a more basic implementation. And beyond that, you're going to want to watch videos by Uncle Bob. Check out on the YouTubes, Clean Architecture, Robert Martin. He's kind of one of the main gurus of clean architecture. Very incredibly talented teacher and speaker and coder. And he goes into a lot. This is Clean Architecture, the book I have here. So he goes into that stuff in fine detail. All right, I'm just going to run one last commercial break, and maybe we'll ramble for a few minutes longer, but we're getting close to the end here. All right. So yeah, we're basically towards the end. I'll just ask if anyone has like a quick quick question, any comments, any off-topic discussion, anything interesting you've learned about, I'll stick around for a couple minutes. But yeah, I think a fairly decent episode today. I got to quite a wide variety of discussions, and it's I have to say, like, the dagger stuff can be really difficult because I want to explain the whole thing. This is just to go not off topic, but just to ramble for a minute here. One of the most difficult things about what I do here is that, as most people have probably noticed by now, I'm fairly ADD. My mind jumps to related topics really quickly. And when I try and explain a topic, my main goal is I start explaining the topic and then I realize, oh, I need to define this subject, or I need to explain this concept. So when someone asks me, can you explain how Dagger 2 works? My mind jumps to, okay, well, before we get to Dagger 2, let's talk about what dependency injection is. And then we'll get to the Dagger 2 stuff. And it's funny, I think some people like this about my explanations, but the drawback with that is that I can get started talking about something and I think my answer is going to take 5 minutes, and then 30 minutes later, which feels like 5 minutes when you're Ryan and you're rambling like crazy, I've, gone all over the place and covered all these different slightly related topics. And so it's difficult with those big subjects like Dagger 2 because I don't know where exactly to stop because I don't have like a prepared lesson. So really what it ends up being is me just ad-libbing it and sharing my experience with whichever tool I've got. But hopefully it's at least useful to people. Anyways, seeing some comments that I should do do an entire show with I'm sorry, Taras, we're almost at the end of the episode and I can't talk about threads in Arch Java 2 in like a couple of minutes, but if you have a quicker question, I can maybe you can feel free to ask that next week and I'll try and help you with that. Anyways, someone was joking, Tina was joking that I should do Tina was joke that I should do entire episode of a live stream with Russian accent, and I is having many years of practice to accent. Actually, so just a random little anecdote. So I grew up on a tiny island, and what that meant is I had to take a water taxi, a boat, to school every day, a 45-minute boat ride to another island where the high school was, and then a 45-minute boat ride back at the end of the day. And so what that meant is that no one at the school, this new school, really knew that I was from Canada and like literally a boat ride away. And I look fairly Eastern European, even though I'm like English, Irish, Scottish, German, Polish, Scandinavian. Like my heritage is all over the place, but I tend to look fairly Eastern European, most people assume. And so what I would do is when I would meet new people, I would pretend to be Russian exchange student, is not speaking very much English. And I ended up tricking like, I don't know, 10 people. And then eventually I'd be like, no, I'm just kidding. I'm Canadian. Like, but that's where I got all that practice with the accent. Thank you. Prativ mentions I should become a teacher. I hope I always teach. I want to always be... I might not be doing Android forever. I'm just going to be perfectly honest to people. I don't plan to be just an Android developer. I'm going to get into AI and all kinds of stuff, but and web development. But I would like to always continue doing this type of stuff because at the end of the day, I didn't go to school for this stuff. basically everything I've learned has been material created by people on the internet for free, for the most part. And so I always feel like I have a debt of gratitude. And the way that I want to pay that debt back is to help people who are in my position, people who maybe they are in school, but maybe they have a really crappy teacher. Or maybe you're like me and you wanted to learn everything yourself and couldn't afford school. I want to always be able to help people like that. But most of all, my big thing is I'm always happy to share my knowledge with people who want to learn. And so that's one of the main reasons why I even thought this would work is I'm a nerd. I like talking about software architecture. And so this is therapeutic for me. Anyways, I think that's going to be the end of the show. Thank you so much, everyone. We will carry on next week with the regular Q&A. I might do some streaming this week. I might just code a lot. And we're also going to be working on the interview with Darrell. I think you guys and girls out there are going to love that because we're going to... I've had conversations with them before, and we're going to have like an epic nerd fest of clean architecture, separation of concerns, and just machine learning, all kinds of awesome stuff. So super stoked for that interview. Watch for announcements. If you're curious about when I go live, I will always try and announce it like at least an hour before. So go ahead and follow Facebook or Twitter and that stuff if you want to just stay updated on when I go live. That's basically it. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll say goodbye in as a couple languages. Au revoir. Ciao gaseo. What else have I got here? Do svidania. Do widzenia is Polish. Kurwa is also Polish. I'm just kidding. Anyways, I'm sorry, that was a bad joke. That's it. Thanks for watching. Peace out.